A disabled boy, a starving stray dog, and a crumbling wall covered in maps no one believed were real. Yet hidden in those shaky lines was a haunting memory of geography, one powerful enough to lead him back to a village that forgot his name 12 years ago. And then one stormy night, when the boy collapsed from exhaustion, it was the dog's howl that cut through the darkness like a blade. This is not just a journey home. It is the resurrection of a soul the world tried to erase. Subscribe now to follow more gripping and heart-touching films like this one. The station never slept. It buzzed with life, even in the dusk hours, when the sky above Kumasi turned a shade of worn-out rust. The cries of hawkers, the clatter of old train wheels, the stink of sweat and roasted plantains, everything bled into a dull roar. And within that roar, within that living, breathing chaos, there was one corner of stillness. Against the soot-stained brick wall of Platform 3 sat a boy, thin as a whispered thought, his clothes layered in grime, his fingers covered in chalk dust. He didn't look up, didn't flinch when a trolley rattled past or when a vendor barked for attention. His world narrowed into the white line he was dragging slowly across the red brick. The chalk snapped. He picked another. Drew again. His name was Adom. Most people had stopped noticing him. "Crazy boy," muttered a woman, clutching her bag tighter as she stepped around him. "Drawing them foolish things again," said a train porter to no one in particular. "Ain't nobody going where he's going." A child tugged on his mother's skirt and pointed. "Mommy, why is he drawing on the wall?" The woman didn't answer. She just hurried the child along. But the wall answered. It always did. In fading morning light, if you stood back far enough, you'd see it hundreds of sheets flapping in the breeze like thin, tired wings. Torn pieces of newspaper, used notebooks, cardboard, fabric. Every inch of the wall behind Adom was covered in maps. Hand-drawn, half-finished, bleeding with smudges and rain marks. Some were crude scribbles of curves and arrows. Others were almost architectural, with symbols, legends, and roads leading to question marks. But they all bore the same title, Way Home. No one asked him who's home. And maybe he wouldn't have known how to answer if they had. He didn't speak much. But when he did, it was always the same story. "Home is north," he'd say in broken Twi. "But I don't know how to spell the sky." He spoke to the wall, not to people. To the bricks that didn't mock him. To the lines he made with chalk and fingertip. And sometimes when he ran out of chalk, with blood drawn from his own scraped hands. His maps were like puzzles dumped from a broken memory. All wrong. All right. A dog lay curled beside him, mangy, sharp-eyed ribs poking through dirty fur. It had no name until Adom called it Kasa, which meant speak. It never did, but it listened better than any human ever had. The two of them were bound by silence and something more invisible, the instinct of the discarded. When the station emptied at night and shadows grew long, Adom and Kasa didn't leave. They never left. They sat. Sometimes they shivered. Sometimes Kasa whimpered. And Adom drew by moonlight, by lamplight, by the dull glow of vending machines. He drew like someone running out of time. One night, a guard kicked over his stack of drawings. "Why you doing this, huh? You think this gonna get you a home?" The guard sneered. "This here's just dirt." Adom looked up just once, and then without saying a word, he began to draw again. That night, Kasa didn't sleep. She watched the wall. She watched as Adom mapped not just roads, but trees, sounds, smells. A curve that wasn't a road, but a song Ma used to hum. A square that wasn't a house, but a place that had blue sky, even in rain. He would sometimes whisper to himself, left at the crying tree, past the red dust, then the smell of firewood. Sometimes he'd cry, not loudly, just tears slipping out without a sound, without a reason. As if his body remembered something he could not. 12 years. That's how long the wall had been building itself, piece by piece, sheet by sheet. People had come and gone. Vendors had changed stalls. Trains had broken and been replaced. But Adom had remained. So had Kasa. So had the wall. Every map different. Every map the same. A maze of loss. A monument of hope. A madness shaped like memory. He was about 12 when he arrived. Or perhaps younger. No one really knew. He never spoke of parents or siblings or places. Just the maps, always the maps. And the wall listened. That red brick beast soaked in his desperation like old blood. Sometimes if you watched closely, you'd see how Adom traced each line with purpose. Like a prayer. Like he believed each line might unlock something, trigger a sound, a scent, a word that had been buried too long. A vendor once tried to give him crayons. He refused them. "They're too bright," he whispered. The station announcer called the arrival of the next train. People surged. Children cried. A phone rang. Adom didn't flinch. He was in a different world. He leaned closer to the wall and began to tape another map, this one drawn on the back of a bus ticket. The lines were trembling like someone tracing a dream. He stepped back, tilted his head, looked again, shook his own hand, frustrated, tore the map down, drew it again. The camera pans over his shoulder. The map now has a new element, a crooked path leading to something that looks like a tree, or maybe a tower. There's a faint smudge above it like smoke or memory. Kasa stirred. She let out a soft growl, more out of instinct than threat. Adom turned to her and whispered, "We're getting closer." Closer to what? No one asked. But in that moment, something hung in the air, something electric, like the hum before lightning. It wasn't in the sound. It was in the stillness. The way Adom's hand stopped trembling. The way Kasa's ears perked. The way the train's whistle echoed differently this time, longer, deeper. A man in a gray coat paused nearby. He wasn't from here. His boots were clean. His eyes were sharp but soft. He glanced at the wall and stopped. Adom didn't see him, but the man saw Adom. And more importantly, he saw the wall. Not just the papers or scribbles, but the language. His eyes narrowed. He stepped closer and closer, then knelt. A chill ran through him. He recognized something. A symbol, a bend, a river curve, a glyph. It didn't make sense, yet it did. He fumbled in his satchel and pulled out an old leather-bound notebook, one filled with sketches, surveys, geographic notations from years ago. He flipped the pages feverishly, then looked back at Adom's wall. The match was imperfect, but unmistakable. His breath caught. Adom kept drawing, unaware. The man whispered, This isn't just a wall." And in that single sentence, everything shifted. The wall was no longer background. It was a map. It was a message. It was a cry for home, drawn by a boy the world forgot, but a wall remembered. The screen begins to dim slowly, then black, then silence, and finally the first haunting words of narration, low and deliberate. For 12 years, no one knew where he came from. But the wall did. The wall always knew. Fade in title, The Way Home. The story of Adom, and with that, the story begins. Memory for some is a river-steady constant, a place to return to. For others, like Adom, it is a cracked mirror, each shard showing a different piece of a life once whole. It begins with heat, a market pulsing under the noonday sun, the sound of drums echoing through the alleys. Red earth, tangled feet, and voices, so many voices. Shouting, singing, bartering. Somewhere someone's frying kelawel. Somewhere else a goat wriggles out of a rope and knocks over a basket of tomatoes. Amid the chaos, a small boy clutches a woman's wrapper with one hand, a cloth doll with the other. His lips are chapped, his forehead sweaty, but his grip on her skirt is sure. "Mama," he whispers too low for anyone to hear. She doesn't turn. She's busy trading maize for soap-balancing coins, fending off a man who insists his onions are sweeter. "Just a moment," she tells him. "Just a moment." Then she bends to speak with another vendor. He lets go. It's not intentional. A pigeon flaps too close and the doll slips. He stoops. When he rises, her skirt is gone, swallowed by the tide of people. "Mama," he calls out louder this time. His eyes sweep the sea of bodies, the blur of fabrics and feet and baskets. No answer. He pushes between legs around crates past a woman yelling into a broken phone. Ma. The cloth doll is gripped tighter now, damp with sweat and fear. The sounds warp. The edges of the frame blur. Every moment stretches too long. Then something touches his shoulder. A hand. He turns. But it isn't Mama. It's a man in a blue shirt. His smile is too wide. You lost little one? The man asks, crouching. Come, I'll help you. Adom doesn't answer, but he lets the man take his hand. Because the market is too loud, too bright, too big. And the man seems to know where to go. They walk out of the market. Past buses, past a woman roasting corn who looks at them strangely. Past the street preachers screaming about the end times. Where's your mama live? The man asks. Adom opens his mouth to answer, but nothing comes out. The man frowns. Then the man says nothing more. He walks faster. His grip tightens. Adom starts to stumble. He wants to cry, but doesn't. A bus honks. The man curses. Somewhere a woman yells about a stolen phone, and then they stop. The hand releases. Wait here, the man says. He steps into a kiosk, then disappears. Adom waits. 5 minutes, 10, an hour. He is 4 years old and alone. The day fades. The heat gives way to evening breeze. The sky turns orange, then violet. He hugs his doll tighter. No one comes. A boy walks by and steals the last biscuit from Adom's shirt pocket. A woman steps over him and mutters something about these street devils. A trotro driver nearly runs over his foot. He moves, he walks, and walks, until he finds the tracks. He follows them out of instinct, not reason. And there, under the awning of a broken station platform, he curls up against a wall, his back against stone, his heart pressed into silence. They say a child forgets quickly. They're wrong. Some things etch themselves into the bones. He didn't forget the color of her wrapper green with yellow suns, or the song she hummed while washing his hair. He didn't forget the sound of her laughter when he dropped a mango into a bucket of water. He didn't forget. But the pictures faded, like someone smeared them with wet hands. His words shrank too. He stopped saying them out loud. He drew instead. Drew what he remembered. Drew what he hoped to remember. Lines that led nowhere. Roads that made no sense. Rivers that curved like his mother's voice. The nights were hardest. That first year he cried without sound. Just rocked and stared at nothing. Until a dog appeared. Skin stretched over ribs. Ears too big. Eyes alert and scared. It didn't bark. It sat across from him, just watching. 2 days passed. He gave it part of a bread roll someone had dropped. It licked his hand. From then on, it stayed. He named it Kasa. Speak, because neither of them could. Not really. Then there was her. The woman with a silver tooth and thick arms who sold wakey near the platform. Every morning she set up her stall, never looking at Adom. Every morning he sat on the edge of her shadow, silent, waiting. The first time she gave him food, she did it without a word. Just slid a small bowl toward him and looked away. He ate it in 2 minutes. Didn't say thank you. Didn't know how. Next day, same thing. On the 5th day, she finally spoke. You got a name? He looked at her, nodded. Adom. God's grace, huh? She said more to herself. Then added, You look like a storm someone forgot to bring home. She didn't ask where he was from or who left him. She just called him my small heart after that. Try Team Beibong. Her language was mixed, her emotions more so. Some said she'd lost a child once. A boy drowned in the rains. No one knew if it was true. But every morning she fed Adom. And every night he curled back into his corner under the platform. Kasa beside him, doll long gone. But the lines on the wall, beginning. It didn't start with chalk. It started with his finger. He traced the floor, the grime, the walls, circles, arrows, crude paths. One night when it rained hard and thunder shook the station, he ran his fingers in the mud and made marks. The water tried to erase them. He drew faster. When he found his first piece of chalk discarded by a group of students boarding a train, he held it like treasure. He used it all that night. When it broke, he cried like it was a bone inside him that snapped. The next morning, he found more. Vendors began leaving bits near his corner, not out of kindness, but curiosity. He never spoke to them. He just drew, every day, every night. Each one a map, a whisper, a scream painted in silence. He grew taller, thinner. The vendors noticed. The woman with the silver tooth once tried to give him shoes. He ran from her for a week after that. When he came back, he brought her a drawing. She didn't understand it, but she kept it. He drew one map on her wakey cart once. She didn't wipe it off, even when the health inspectors warned her. "It's the only map that gets me home," she said. She wasn't joking, but not everyone was kind. Some called him cursed. Children threw rocks. A preacher said he was possessed. One time someone set fire to part of the wall. He cried not for the fire, but because a map he'd drawn the night before was gone, he spent the next day redrawing it from memory. It was darker, sharper, sadder. He taped it higher out of reach. Kasa barked at anyone who came too close. They stopped calling him crazy after that. They started calling him the boy who remembers things nobody else does. But nobody really believed he remembered anything. They thought he was just a ghost, waiting for the trains to stop. And yet, something pulsed behind his eyes. Something deeper than madness. A rhythm, a pattern. As if each map wasn't a lie but a language. One that no one had taken the time to learn. Not yet. But one day someone would. One day someone would listen. And when they did, the wall would speak. Not just for Adom, but for every child the world had lost and left to wander. Some friendships begin with laughter, others with a handshake. But the bond between Adom and Kasa began with silence. The kind of silence born between two creatures the world had forgotten how to love. It was the third month of Harmattan when the dog appeared, dust curling around its paws, ribs exposed like the remains of a sunken ship. Its fur, once white perhaps, was now the color of dried earth. And its eyes, wide amber alert, were filled with something only Adom recognized: exile. The first night the dog kept its distance. It watched from across the tracks, just beyond the broken edge of Platform 3, where the rusting iron beams wept in the morning dew. Kasa didn't bark, didn't whimper, didn't growl, just watched. Adom was crouched against his wall, his fingers tracing faint lines from memory into crumbling chalk. He didn't speak to the dog, didn't offer food. He simply turned his body slightly enough to say, "I see you." The next day, the dog was closer. 3 feet. Adom dropped a kernel of roasted corn, intentionally, or not, no one knew. Kasa didn't move, but when Adom turned his back, the corn was gone. This ritual repeated. A scrap here, a crumb there. Trust came not with words, but with the absence of fear. By the end of the week, the dog was beside him. By the end of the month, it slept pressed against his side. He named it Kasa. Speak. The irony wasn't lost, though few would have caught it. The boy barely spoke. The dog never did. But between them bloomed a language no one else could hear. When Adom ate rarely and sparingly, he always divided it. One bite for himself, one for Kasa. When he drew, Kasa watched with her head tilted slightly, as if following the geography unfolding under chalked fingers. When people shouted, Kasa moved in front of him. When rain came, Kasa tried to shield him. One afternoon, a group of children dared each other to run up and yank the drawings off the wall. They laughed, pointed, mocked. Kasa snarled, not the whimpering growl of a cornered animal, but a full guttural threat that stopped the laughter mid-air. The children scattered. Adom didn't react. He simply placed another drawing on the wall and whispered, "Good girl." She blinked. That was enough. They shared no home, no bowl, no name beyond what they gave each other. But in a world where both had been trampled, one by fate, one by foot, they found anchor in each other's presence. Vendors began to notice. "He only eats when she does," someone observed. "Look how she watches him," said another. "Like she's his mother." They were wrong. She wasn't his mother. She was his mirror. Two creatures built of wounds and survival. One evening, the sky broke open. It had rained before, but this was different. This was thunder that shook metal, lightning that scratched the sky like broken nails. The type of rain that strips bark from trees, washes sins from streets. The station scattered. Vendors fled. Trains halted. Security barked orders no one could hear over the roar. Adom stayed. He always did, but not this time. A guard approached, face twisted in disgust. "Get him out of here. The boy and his mutt stink." Another joined. "He's ruining the walls. Look at this mess. Chalk paper urine. Damn art show." They didn't wait for consent. A baton struck near his feet. A boot kicked over his drawing tin. Kasa lunged, fangs bared. A kick landed square into her ribs. She yelped, Adom screamed, not with words, but with a sound that ripped straight from the place inside no child should ever have to find. He grabbed Kasa. They ran, out of the station, into the rain, through alleyways that stank of oil and urine and forgotten breath. Past closed shops and locked gates. Through garbage piles and shattered glass. Finally, they stopped beneath the belly of an old concrete bridge where trucks passed above, indifferent. They collapsed there. No one came after. No one ever did. The rain didn't stop for hours. It became a kind of lullaby, harsh, merciless, honest. Adom sat knees tucked to his chest shirt, soaked through chalk paste dripping from his pockets. Kasa lay curled into his side, trembling. They didn't move. The sound of the river below swelled. A rat skittered past. Somewhere a siren moaned. Adom looked up, into the sky, through the gaps in the concrete where water poured like veins. He didn't cry. He didn't blink. He just stared into the storm as if waiting for it to carve open a memory, a road, a face. His lips parted. A single word escaped. Home. Kasa nudged him gently, her muzzle pressed against his cheek. He closed his eyes. In the weeks that followed, they didn't return to the station. They wandered, abandoned lots. Market dumpsters, church porches, construction sites. Each day a new exile. Each night a new shadow. But still Adom drew, with sticks in mud, with soot on walls, with stones against concrete, and Kasa always watched. Sometimes when food was too scarce, she disappeared for hours. Returned with something stolen bread, half-eaten mango, once a bag of chin-chin. She laid it before him like a sacred offering. He never asked where it came from. He just broke it in two and handed her half. That was their pact. One morning they came across a burned-out minivan. Its windows shattered, its tires missing. Inside the metal floor was still dry. They made it theirs. The van became a base. The walls became his new gallery. He covered them in maps. Dozens, each one with new shapes, new colors. A bend that reminded him of laughter, a square that felt like a window, and always at the edge of every drawing a pair of paw prints, deliberate, as if Kasa had walked across them after they dried. He never stopped her. He liked it. It made the maps feel like they belonged to both of them. Then came the day she didn't wake. He found her curled beneath the driver's seat, her body's stiff, eyes closed. For one terrifying moment, he thought she'd left him, that this chapter too, like all the others, had ended in silence. But then her ear twitched. Barely. She was sick. He didn't know how to fix it. He tried to feed her. She wouldn't eat. He ran through town begging for help. No one listened. No one followed. In desperation, he dragged her on a cart through half the city to a mechanic who sometimes fed stray dogs. The man cursed. She's too far gone. You should let her sleep. Adom shook his head violently. No. His first full word in days. He begged. Tears finally broke. The mechanic relented, wrapped her in cloth, injected something. Adom waited outside for 3 hours. When the door opened, Kasa limped out, weak but alive. He fell to the ground and hugged her. Didn't let go for a full 5 minutes. After that, he never left her side. Not when she ate, not when she limped, not even when she relieved herself. He whispered to her constantly. Stories, apologies, promises. I won't leave you, he said. Not like they left me. She wagged her tail. They returned to the station. The guards had changed. The wall still stood. So did Adom. He touched the brick, felt it warm beneath his palm. Kasa lay beside him, and he drew. This time not from memory, but from love. A map that didn't just lead somewhere, but to someone. In the last light of that day, a vendor passing by paused, watched the boy and his dog, their silhouettes pressed into the wall like shadows that refused to die. She whispered to herself, "That dog ain't no mutt. That dog's his heartbeat." And she wasn't wrong. They were no longer just survivors. They were a compass, pointing always toward a home they hadn't yet found, but refused to stop believing in. The train pulled into Kumasi Station at 11:36 a.m. right on time. A low hiss of brakes, a jolt. Then the doors slid open with a mechanical sigh. A shuffle of polished shoes and laptop bags flooded onto the platform, chased by the rhythmic barks of street vendors and the dry clang of steel on steel. Amid the crowd, a man stepped off with deliberate calm. He carried no suitcase, only a brown leather satchel slung across one shoulder, and a book bound in cracked black leather under his arm. Professor Kojo Mensah, 67, didn't believe in luck. He believed in maps, not just road maps, but memory maps, soil maps, river basins, tectonic shifts. He could read a landscape the way others read tea leaves. Decades in the field had turned his palms coarse as bark and his gaze unshakable. His mind was a topography of forgotten coordinates, half-buried legends, and stubborn truth. And yet, even he could not have predicted what would happen that morning, nor how a wall would stop him in his tracks. He had 35 minutes before his connecting train. Just enough time for a slow walk, maybe a meat pie, and a quiet seat by the terminal window. He adjusted his glasses, took in the chaos, and smiled faintly. Kumasi had changed, but then again, it hadn't. He passed the coffee stall. The shoe shiner who ignored him. The boy selling second-hand books. His steps were steady, but his thoughts wandered mostly to the speech he would give in Tamale. Cartography and the loss of oral boundaries. He'd rehearsed it 3 times, and still it felt too academic. Too dry. He needed a story, something that grounded the science, something human. And then he saw the wall. At first he barely registered it. Just more clutter in a station full of clutter. A messy quilt of taped paper and chalk scrawls. Kids' graffiti, maybe. Or a beggar's version of art. He turned to continue, but something made him pause. A curve, just one. A curve on a tattered sheet of notebook paper, curling like a question mark. A river bend. A ridge. He took a step closer. Then 2. A woman selling oranges rolled her eyes. That boy again. Still putting rubbish on the wall, but the professor wasn't listening. His fingers reached out, hovering just above the page. His pupils narrowed. No, it couldn't be. He leaned in, his breath caught behind clenched teeth. On the sheet was a crude outline, but unmistakable. A triangle of ridges, a small circle nestled in the center, 2 broken lines that branched from the lower corner. His heart kicked. He had seen this before, not in a book, not online, but 20 years ago, under a canvas tent pitched in the dust of northern Gannan, while interviewing a dying elder from a village so remote the roads didn't have names. He stepped back, eyes scanning the surrounding sheets. Hundreds of them, at least. Some were nonsense. Spirals, stick figures, almost abstract messes of memory. But others pulsed with something different. He spotted another. 3 dots along a jagged slope. That was no accident. A topographic cue. Elevation marks, perhaps. He'd taught his students to recognize terrain-based language, even in non-cartographic contexts. But this wasn't mimicry. This was memory. A memory trying to draw itself back into the world. He tore his satchel open and pulled out the leather-bound book. Pages fluttered. Notes jotted down with red ink. Old coordinates, partial sketches. And finally a map. Hand-drawn, annotated, faint pencil lines from 20 years ago. He held it up, lined it beside the map on the wall. They didn't match perfectly, but they sang the same rhythm. The boy, the artist, who had drawn this, his eyes scanned the platform sharp and searching. And then, there, across the station floor, sitting on the cold cement, was a boy. Or perhaps a young man. It was hard to say. Thin, disheveled, clothed in dust and frayed fabric. He was hunched over, chalk in hand, tracing another map onto a flattened cereal box. Beside him, a skinny dog slept with one paw over its nose. Professor Mensah approached slowly, not wanting to spook him. He stopped a few meters away, crouched carefully and watched. The boy's hand moved with strange certainty. No hesitation, no erasing. As if he weren't inventing the map, but remembering it. His lips moved, muttering, no repeating. A river then left at the tree that cries, then the smoke. The professor couldn't hear the rest. He inched closer. The boy looked up, startled, eyes wide, feral. One foot shifted, ready to run. Mensah held up both hands. No harm, he said softly. I'm just looking. The dog growled, low, guttural. The professor nodded toward the drawing. Is this a real place? The boy didn't answer, but his gaze flicked to the page, then back to Mensah. He tapped the chalk once, then pointed to the corner of the wall. The professor turned. There, drawn in faint lines barely visible beneath newer maps, was another pattern. He knew it instantly. A ridgeline, a forked river. A hill he'd once climbed in sweltering heat while a translator explained a folk tale about spirits who guarded crossroads. He felt his knees give slightly. This wasn't chance. This wasn't play. He took a breath. "My name is Kojo," he said. "I study maps. And I think you know something I've been searching for." Still no answer, but the boy stood, not threateningly, almost ceremonially. He walked to the wall, selected one of the maps, ripped at the corners, drawn on the inside of a detergent box. He handed it to Mensa. No words, just the map. Mensa held it like scripture. A shape emerged. A new one, a slope, a pool. A line of dots leading from the edge of the page into the unknown. "Do you know where this is?" he asked. The boy pointed. "North, always north." The professor's pulse raced. Have you been there?" The boy's eyes glistened. He shook his head, then nodded. "Both, neither. A memory unraveling or rebuilding." Mensa stepped back overwhelmed. His brain surged with questions. His hands trembled. His career had been filled with theories. Academic papers, peer-reviewed maps of lands no one cared about. But here was a living map. A cartographer made not from degrees, but from pain. The boy began drawing again. Another map. A sequence. Not just one location, but a path. A journey. And with each line, the professor felt the world shifting beneath him. This was no coincidence. This was destiny traced in chalk and hunger. Minutes later, the train whistle blew. The professor turned. His train, his conference, his speech. But he didn't move. He looked at the boy, then the wall, then back to the drawing in his hand. He made his choice. The train pulled away without him. Mensa sat beside the boy and whispered, "Let's find your way home." The next morning, the professor returned. He hadn't slept. The map Adom gave him the day before was spread open on the motel bed all night. He'd stared at it under the dim bulb like a man deciphering prophecy. At 3 a.m., he'd retrieved his old survey notebooks, the ones collecting dust in a trunk no one had touched since his retirement. Coordinates, soil patterns, local dialects scribbled in the margins of his field notes. One page in particular struck him a sketch of a slope near Yendi, annotated with the words, "Red Dust Path," elders said, "Sorrow Hill." It was almost identical to what Adom had drawn from memory. Now standing again in the belly of Kumasi Station, Mensa felt the weight of urgency pressing on his chest like a storm cloud refusing to burst. But Adom was not there, not in the corner, not by the vending machines. The chalk wall remained half of it torn, trampled, smeared by the restless night. But the boy was gone. "Where is he?" Mensa asked the orange vendor. She shrugged. "That one comes and goes like ghost." The dog maybe knows. Indeed, Kasa was there. Curled up in Adom's old spot, her head resting on her paws, eyes open, watching. Mensa approached slowly. She didn't growl. She didn't move either. Only when he knelt and placed the same map between them did she blink. "Where is he, girl?" he asked. Kasa's ears twitched. She stood stretched with the stiffness of a loyal soldier just off duty, then began to walk past the vending carts around the concrete columns down the platform. Mensa followed. They crossed tracks, turned down a narrow alley. Then beyond a rusted fence, in the shadow of an abandoned shipping container, they found him. Adom was crouched in a corner, his back hunched, fingers smearing something onto the floor. The professor froze. Not because of the image, but because of the color. Red. It was not chalk. It was blood. Mensa rushed forward. "Wait, don't!" Adom flinched, retreating against the metal wall, eyes wide with animal panic. Mensa stopped immediately. Hands up, voice soft. "I'm not here to hurt you, I promise." Adom didn't speak. But he didn't run either. The professor looked at the ground. A crude drawing, half a map, sketched in dried blood from Adom's nose. The boy wiped it carelessly with his sleeve. He was pale, trembling. Mensa noticed the open wound under his nostril, the skin on his knuckles scraped raw. There was no paper left, no chalk. Just desperation, just need, just memory clawing its way out through skin. Mensa gently reached into his satchel and pulled out a stack of blank paper and a thick graphite pencil. He set them down on the floor and stepped back. Adom watched, hesitated, then with trembling fingers reached for the pencil and drew. For the next hour, the professor didn't speak. He simply watched as Adom filled page after page. Some were near gibberish lines, looping into nowhere figures and symbols that made little sense. But others were cartographic gold, Mensa took notes, annotated, assembled them like fragments of an old tapestry, looking for overlaps, echoes, threads of familiarity. He recognized a ridgeline from Bunkpurugu, a dried riverbed once mapped by a colonial geologist, a shrine symbol he'd once seen carved into a rock near Saboba, and always the same trajectory, north. The maps weren't fixed points, they were moments, a shifting compass built not of latitude and longitude, but of trauma and smell and sound. Can I keep these?" Mensa asked after Adom had filled 6 pages. The boy looked down at the drawings, clutched them close, then slowly, almost imperceptibly handed over 3 of them. Mensa handled them like relics. These are not just drawings," he whispered. "They're proof. Testimony." Adom looked up. Something in his eyes softened. Not trust, not yet, but a loosening of the knot around his silence. The professor took a risk. He pulled out an old folded photo from his satchel. A grainy image from decades ago, showing a group of villagers and himself standing near a baobab tree, with a mountain ridge in the distance. He showed it to Adom. "Do you know this?" Adom took the photo, tilted his head, squinted. Then he pointed to the upper left corner where the faint shape of a hill loomed. He tapped it once, then slowly drew a line in the air toward the base. He whispered, "Tree that cries." Mensa's breath caught. That's exactly what the village elder had called it, back when he explained how the sap bled red when cut. A sacred site. A place of mourning and remembering. It wasn't coincidence. Adom knew. He didn't just draw these places. He remembered them. He had been there once. Back at the station, Mensa set up a makeshift workspace on a plastic bench, shielding his papers from the wind with a chipped folder and a bottle of water. Adom sat nearby, Kasa beside him always. The professor spread the drawings out like cards, began marking them, connecting paths. "Look," he said, pointing, forgetting for a moment that Adom might not follow his academic jargon. This is the same stream you drew earlier. The fork matches this dried tributary north of Nalarigu." He turned a page. "This hill here, that's no mistake. It aligns with Mount Yali. And this curve here, that's not random. That's the footpath around the salt flats. You've seen these places, or..." He stopped. Adom was staring at him, not blinking, not afraid, just listening. The professor softened. "Who are you, child?" Adom pointed to his chest, then to the wall behind them. The professor turned. There in smudged charcoal were 3 letters, a DOM, no surname, no age, no date, just a name, and hundreds of maps. Mensa lowered his head. "I'm going to help you," he said quietly. "I don't know how yet, but I will." That night they stayed near the station. Mensa found a hostel and asked the manager for permission to let the boy and the dog rest in the courtyard. The manager hesitated, then saw the look in the professor's eyes and nodded. Adom curled against the wall, Kasa at his feet. Mensa watched them through the window for hours. He wasn't religious, but for the first time in years he prayed, not for answers, not for clarity, but for time, because now the search had begun in earnest. The puzzle was real, the coordinates were human, and the compass, broken though it was, had always pointed north. The line at the Ministry of Social Welfare in Kumasi was already winding down the steps when Professor Mensa arrived. Hot air clung to skin like damp cloth, and the electric fan above the reception desk did nothing but push warm dust in circles. A faded poster peeling from the wall read, "Every child has a right to a home." Below it, a woman was crying softly, her paperwork trembling in her hands. Mensa stood straight. The folder in his hand, thick with notes, maps, transcriptions, and photos, was clutched like a brief of evidence in a courtroom. Behind him, Adom waited outside under the shade of a dying neem tree, Kasa lying beside his feet, like a worn-out sentry. A receptionist in a blue blouse waved him forward. "Name and reason," she asked, without looking up. "Professor Kojo Mensa," he said crisply. "I'm submitting an urgent request for child origin tracing and repatriation assistance. The case is unusual." That got her attention. She blinked. "You're not his relative?" "No. I found him, rather I was led to him. He's undocumented, possibly displaced. There are indications he may come from a specific region in the Northern Territories. He remembers places in topographic detail." "Sir," she cut in flatly, holding up a hand. "If he has no birth certificate, no official documentation, and you're not a legal guardian, we can't file for repatriation. We need more than memory What is this drawings? She flipped through the folder without care. Pages fluttered like wings, trying to escape her grip. Mensa leaned in. Those drawings match real topographic features. River paths, elevation lines, landmarks, some of which I documented myself 2 decades ago. This boy remembers places he hasn't seen in years. Places he couldn't possibly invent. She sighed. Professor, I'm not saying you're lying, but we've had dozens of street children claiming to remember a village, or saying their mother's face came to them in dreams. The system doesn't operate on emotion. We need proof. I'm giving you proof, Mensa snapped. Her tone hardened. We need documents. DNA tests, witnesses. What you're giving me is chalk and paper. An hour later, in a small gray-walled office, he sat across from a man named Officer Kwaki, Social Welfare Regional Supervisor. A man with a polished head, pristine files, and a look that said he'd long since traded compassion for protocol. Kwaki flipped through the professor's folder with gloved indifference, then sat back adjusting his tie. So he said, we have a boy with no surname, no age, no papers. He's been living at a train station for over a decade, and your theory based on what, again doodles, Maps Mensa corrected. They look like something my son would draw on the back of a cereal box. Mensa's jaw clenched. Because your son has the luxury of cereal. This boy has dirt, and yet somehow managed to record half the northern landscape with the precision of a geographer. Kwaki shrugged. Be that as it may. Professor, there's nothing actionable here. You said the boy doesn't speak clearly. How can we verify anything? What if he's mentally unstable? He's not unstable, he's traumatized. That's different. Sir Kwaki said, locking eyes with him, we have children with real needs, real cases, orphans with names, abused minors with police reports. This boy, this Adom, he's not in our records. For all intents and purposes, he doesn't exist. Mensa stared. Something in him fractured. You sit in this room and dare talk about existence, as if paperwork defines humanity. He said, voice rising. Kwaki raised a brow. I'm doing my job. No, Mensa said, standing. You're burying a child alive because it's easier than listening to the shape of his pain. Professor, if you don't calm down. I will not calm down. He slammed both palms on the desk. This boy has survived on scraps, on memory, on maps. He's drawn the world in order to find his way back to it. And you sit here behind your glass doors calling him a burden. He's more rooted than anyone in this building. There was silence. Outside a fan rattled. Then Kwaki spoke. You want to play savior, fine. But the ministry will not support a wild goose chase based on a traumatized vagrant and a dog. Mensa stared at him, shaking with fury. He's not a vagrant, he said slowly. He's a boy, a human being, and his memory is more valid than your entire file cabinet. He grabbed the folder and stormed out. Outside, Adom sat still beneath the neem tree. Kasa rose as soon as she saw Mensa's face tight with fury, red in the cheeks, breathing hard. The professor dropped to one knee. He looked at Adom. The boy looked back wary. I tried, Mensa whispered, but they won't help. Adom didn't flinch. He seemed unsurprised. He reached into his sack and pulled out another folded map, one he hadn't shown before. He handed it over. Mensa unfolded it. The lines were thick, almost carved. There was a central symbol, a tree it looked like, or a totem. Paths spooled from it like veins. One path was marked in red chalk. It curved toward a jagged arrow pointing north. Adom pointed to it, then to the sky, then placed his palm over his heart. Mensa felt a lump rise in his throat. He looked at Kasa, who tilted her head, then looked in the same direction, then back at Adom. I suppose that's our answer then, the professor said softly. We go. He pulled out his phone and booked a seat on the next northbound bus, leaving in 90 minutes. They packed light, a small satchel with maps, a bottle of water, 3 packets of dried gari. Adom refused shoes. He walked better without them. The bus was a rickety, faded green beast, held together by bolts and blessings. The driver shouted destinations while chewing gum loud enough to startle birds. The air smelled like oil and oranges. Adom stepped aboard, first Kasa close behind. The conductor hesitated. No dogs. She's coming, Mensa said. You'll have to pay for her seat. Mensa didn't blink, then give her a window. People stared. Adom didn't care. He clutched the edge of his paper and pressed his forehead to the glass. Outside, the city thinned. Dust rose. Horns faded. Hours later, the sun bled orange across the horizon, and the land flattened into wide fields of cassava and bone-dry brush. Adom hadn't spoken, but he hadn't stopped drawing either. He drew in the condensation on the window, with his fingertip. A curved river, a cracked hill. Mensa watched him, quietly. He knew this was no longer just about finding a village. It was about returning memory to a boy who had carried too many of them alone. And as the bus rolled deeper into the fading light past the edge of official maps and into the heart of what was once forgotten, the professor finally let go of everything he thought he knew about the world. He followed the maps not of paper, but of heart. And the journey had only just begun. The bus died 27 kilometers south of Damongo. One moment it was coughing along the scorched road with the defiance of a dying animal. The next, it lurched, choked, and exhaled its last breath in a plume of dark smoke. The engine sputtered, groaned, and fell into silence. It was 2:47 p.m. The sun was merciless, and there was nothing but horizon in every direction, barren orange, infinite. The passengers groaned. The driver cursed. The conductor kicked the tire like it owed him money. Mensa closed his eyes and took a slow breath. Adom was already standing outside barefoot on the baking earth, eyes scanning the north. Kasa followed tongue-lolling ribs, rising and falling. They didn't seem surprised, as if the road had simply reminded them the real journey never waits for permission. They walked. At first, the professor tried to keep pace, but his knees protested, and his breathing became shallow. Dust coated the inside of his throat like ash. Still he walked, because Adom walked, his back straight, his pace steady, his focus unshakable. He didn't ask questions, didn't look back. He led without leading, and Kasa, silent alert, walked beside him like a ghost made of fur and bone. By sundown, the road had long disappeared, replaced by dry shrubs, gullies, and fractured rocks that cracked underfoot like broken promises. They found a dry riverbed and followed it. The air shimmered with heat. The professor's shirt clung to him wet and gritty. His lips cracked. His water bottle emptied 3 hours ago. "We need to rest," he said more to the air than to anyone else. Adom paused, looked at the ground, then pointed to a pile of stones, shaded by a thorny acacia. They sat. Kasa curled into the crook of Adom's legs and sighed. Mensa rubbed his calves, wincing. "How do you do it?" he muttered. "How do you know where to go?" Adom didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of charcoal nearly worn to a nub. He walked to the riverbed and began to draw, not on paper, on earth. With long, slow strokes, he carved lines into the sand. A fork, a loop, a hill, a sharp turn. He moved with the certainty of someone remembering a lullaby. Mensa approached, crouched beside him. The professor's breath caught. This wasn't improvisation. This was accuracy, topographical fluency. He recognized the ridgeline Yagbon Hill, the bend in the trail he once crossed in 2003 while interviewing local elders about water scarcity. Even the contour of the dry stream bed was perfect. "You remember this?" Mensa whispered, as if your mind was the land. Adom looked up, just once, then pointed north again. They continued after dusk. The moon rose blood orange, smeared behind haze. Owls called from afar. Insects whined in a low, cruel hum. Adom walked 10 paces ahead. Kasa followed close. Mensa dragged his feet behind every step in negotiation with pain. They had no flashlight, only starlight, only instinct. And then it happened. In the thicket of shadow in the blind turn of a dried-out gully, Adom disappeared. One moment he was there, the next a rustle, a shift, a snap of dry twigs. Kasa Mensa called. She barked, short, sharp. Mensa dropped the satchel and ran. Bushes scratched his arms. His glasses slid from his nose. Panic bloomed in his chest like wildfire. He stumbled through thorns, calling Adom, Adom, nothing. Then another bark, urgent, closer. He followed it, came into a clearing, and froze. Kasa was standing rigid at the edge of a small ledge. Below her, Adom lay curled on his side. His elbow scraped a small gash bleeding down his shin. His eyes were open. He wasn't crying. He was whispering. Mensa scrambled down, nearly falling. "Are you hurt?" he asked, out of breath. Adom didn't respond. He was tracing something in the dirt beside him with his finger. Mensa grabbed a scarf, tied it around the wound, then turned to the dirt. Another map, drawn not out of compulsion, but survival. "You fell," Mensa asked. Adom nodded, barely. "I was following the curve, but it moved." The professor didn't know what that meant, but he knew one thing. This boy, this barefoot cartographer, was navigating a mental geography more complex than any GPS. They camped under the stars that night. No tent, just the sky cracked and enormous. Mensah used his jacket as a pillow. Kasa stayed curled between them, chest rising and falling like a metronome. Adom spoke once in the darkness. Mama said the trees whisper names when you get close to home. Mensah turned his head. He didn't reply, but a tear slid down his temple into the dust. By morning they were moving again. The landscape changed. Subtle at first, a drop in humidity, the shape of the rocks, the smell of the wind, less dry, more loamy. Adom began drawing in the air as he walked, his fingers slicing invisible paths. Mensah watched. His scientist's brain warred with the mysticism of it, but he couldn't deny what he was seeing. This boy, he murmured, he's carrying a memory of place more precise than satellite imaging. They crested a hill. Adom paused, closed his eyes, breathed in. Kasa whimpered. Then he pointed, down the slope. A clearing, a grove of baobabs, a faint trail, a hut, and a road. By the time they reached the outskirts of the village, the sun was beginning its slow descent behind the ridgeline, casting long blue shadows across the laterite road. A battered wooden sign leaned sideways, half swallowed by creeping grass. Yendi East, Pop 1204. Adom stopped walking. He didn't say a word, but his breathing shifted shallow, rhythmic, as though he were bracing himself for something that hadn't yet arrived, but had always been waiting. Kasa barked once, a low, unsure sound. Professor Mensah tightened his grip on the satchel full of maps, and they stepped forward into the dusty heart of the village. It was quiet, too quiet. Not lifeless, there were voices, yes, but hushed ones. Smoke rose from a cooking fire. A rooster strutted without conviction. But as the strangers entered, eyes peeked from behind wooden shutters, conversations paused mid-sentence. A young man leaned against a mango tree, arms folded. Mensah approached with the caution of a diplomat crossing into contested land. "Good evening," he said in Mampruli. The man nodded slowly. "Evening. I'm looking for someone. A family, actually." "Who's—" Mensah opened the satchel and carefully removed one of Adom's drawings, a detailed sketch of the nearby hills, a cluster of huts beside a tree labeled, "The One That Bleeds." The man frowned. "I don't know it." "It's here," Mensah insisted, voice low. "He remembers this place." The man looked past him at Adom, who stood at the edge of the clearing, barefoot, blank-eyed, one hand clutching a strip of faded cloth from his pocket. "Who is he?" "We don't know all of it yet," Mensah said. "But he knows this land. He remembers things no stranger could." The man shook his head. "There's been no missing boy here." "Not that I remember." He walked off. One by one they tried. House to house, hut to hut. Each conversation began with the professor's measured questions, careful tone, humble posture. Each ended with the same polite shake of the head, the same nervous retreat, the same refusal. "No one missing here." "No, sorry, Professor." "Try the next village." Adom said nothing. He simply stared at the corners of huts, the shape of rooftops, the swing of cloth drying on lines. At one point he touched the side of a stone well, then pulled his hand back like it had burned him. Mensah knelt beside him. "Do you know this?" Adom's lips parted. But instead of words, there was a single tear that broke, fell, and vanished into the dust. Just before twilight, they reached the last row of homes. At the end of the path, a small clay compound sat in silence, ivy, curling around the edges of a crumbling fence. A few chickens scratched lazily in the yard. In the doorway, a woman sat on a low stool peeling cassava with weathered hands, and beside her, an old woman. Her skin was creased like dry parchment, her eyes clouded but alive. As they approached, the younger woman looked up. Mensah began his usual introduction, but the old woman spoke first. Not to him, to the dog. Her voice was a whisper, barely a breath. "Kasa!" Kasa's ears perked. Adom froze. The professor leaned forward. "You know her?" The old woman squinted, looked at Adom, and something in her expression shifted like a door slamming open in a room long abandoned. She didn't speak. She stood, hobbled forward, stopped inches from Adom's face, and said, "That face? It looks like Amma's boy." Adom blinked. The professor felt his pulse hammering in his throat. "Who is Amma?" he asked. The old woman didn't answer. She turned and called toward the house. A younger woman emerged. Late 30s, her features carved in fatigue, her eyes rimmed in silence. "Mama," she asked. The elder pointed. "Look." The woman turned, looked at Adom, didn't speak, didn't blink, then gasped, sharp and brittle, and took a step back like she'd seen a ghost. The next moments unfolded like a dream held too tightly. Voices rose. Someone called a name, Kwame. "Come here now." A man appeared from behind the house. A child peeked from behind a door. The old woman sat again, eyes dazed. The professor was ushered into the compound, his questions tripping over one another. The younger woman finally said, "Amma was my sister." She pointed to Adom. She had a boy. She called him her blessing. Adom. The word hung in the air like a hymn. Mensa leaned forward. "Where is she now?" The woman swallowed. Her voice broke. "She died. In the storm. The year the bridge collapsed. She went to market and never came back. People said, maybe the river. Maybe she lost the boy and followed him." Adom didn't speak. He was trembling now, not from fear, but from something deeper. Recognition. Kasa walked forward, lay down at the woman's feet, and placed her head gently on the ground. The woman stared. She had a dog just like this. White, but always covered in dust. "We used to joke it would die before it barked," Mensa whispered. "It never had to." The woman looked at Adom again, then knelt, reached forward, and touched his cheek. Her fingers lingered. "You have her eyes," she whispered. "I thought you died." Adom opened his mouth. His lips moved. No sound came. But then, a word, faint, cracked. "Mama!" The woman gasped, began to cry. And so did the old woman, and the man, and the professor. The silence broke, not with wailing, but with a wave of breath held too long, finally exhaled. The professor stepped back, watching. His hands shook, but it was no longer from exhaustion. It was awe. He looked to the west, where the sky was painting itself in bruised purples and dying fire, and he whispered, "We found it." Not a village, not just a name, but home. The world shifted in silence the moment Amma's mother appeared. She stepped into the doorway like someone stepping out of a storm. Not physically, but emotionally, as if she had been wandering through grief for 12 long years and had just now stumbled back into the living. Her back was curved with time, her hair coiled in gray, and her hands were trembling before she even reached the threshold. Her daughter tried to speak, tried to prepare her, but there are no words in any language to soften the truth that a ghost has come home. She walked forward, eyes locked on the boy. Adom stood barefoot in the courtyard, dust rising around his ankles. He didn't move. Kasa lay behind him, her breath shallow legs, splayed tail twitching weakly. The old woman's breath hitched once then again. She didn't ask his name. She didn't ask where he had been. She saw it in his eyes and in his silence. She collapsed. It wasn't theatrical. It was as if her knees finally surrendered to the weight of hope and heartbreak, carried for too long. The family rushed to her side, laid her gently on the mat. Her chest rose and fell. Her eyes fluttered open. She whispered only 2 words. "Adom Nyem," God's grace. Minutes later, she sat propped against the doorway, a damp cloth on her forehead. She beckoned with shaking fingers, calling him forward. Adom approached like a child in a memory not walking, but floating in the slow current of something sacred. She touched his face, then cupped it in both palms, and finally she asked, "Do you know the way back, my child?" Her voice cracked open that moment, like a fruit too ripe to hold its own skin. Adom said nothing. He didn't need to. He reached into his waistband and pulled out a tattered piece of paper, crumpled, torn, faded. One of the first maps. He placed it in her lap, then wrapped his arms around her and wept, his body silent, but the tears falling in loud rhythmic drops that darkened her skirt. She held him and rocked, not with words, but with memory, the way only a mother can hold something she once believed was lost to the earth. In a quiet corner of the courtyard, Kasa whimpered. Mensa turned. The dog was barely breathing now. The journey had taken more from her than anyone realized. Her ribs rose unevenly, and her eyes blinked slowly, as if even blinking now required the last of her strength. "She's fading," Mensa whispered. A village elder stepped forward. "We'll call the healer." "I'll pay," Mensa said. "No," the elder replied. "This dog has done more than any of us. She will be healed with honor." They lifted Kasa carefully and carried her to the healer's hut, a small circular structure filled with the smell of mint ash and ancient knowing. By morning, the news had spread. Not just that a boy had returned, but how. Hundreds of maps, drawings, roads not paved with tar but with memory, Paper after paper, once taped to a train station wall, now delivered like offerings to a village that had forgotten what it once lost. The community center, an open building with mud walls and a thatched roof, was transformed overnight. Villagers hung every single map across its walls with reverence. Some were held together with tape, others stained with oil, a few drawn on scraps of fabric. All bore the same shaky handwriting. All pointed somewhere. All whispered hope. Children gathered, eyes wide. One boy whispered, "He drew all this with no teacher." An elder nodded, with no paper, no roof, and no one who believed him. Adom didn't speak at the gathering. He sat at the back beside Kasa, who, though still weak, was now breathing evenly. Her body wrapped in a clean cloth, her paws cleaned and bandaged. Villagers passed by to touch her head, offering yams, smoked fish, and bowls of water as tribute. Mensah stood at the front of the room, wearing his worn white shirt and trembling slightly. "I've taught cartography for 37 years, he began. "And I have never seen anything like this." He held up one of the maps. "There are rivers on this paper that are not on official surveys. Hills recorded in no database. But Adom remembered them, from a time before memory should be possible." He looked out at the crowd. "He found you without a phone, without an address, without a name. He found you because you lived in him. The way land holds the shape of footsteps long after they've gone." The room was silent. Then someone clapped, then another, and then the whole room thundered with applause, not polite, not ceremonial, but from the gut, from the part of people that remembers. Later that night, Amma's mother sat beside Adom. She had not stopped holding his hand since he arrived. Her thumb traced the edge of his knuckles like reading braille made from pain and forgiveness. "You remember the crying tree?" she asked. Adom nodded. "You remember the smell of millet porridge burning in the mornings?" He nodded again. "And the way your mother sang." This time his lips parted. He hummed, off-key, but familiar, and her eyes filled again. "I knew," she whispered, "somewhere in me I always knew." Kasa barked once in her sleep, and Adom laughed, a real laugh. Small, but real. The room exhaled, and the stars above Yendi blinked softly. The city of Accra pulsed with motion. Cars darted between crumbling curbs, and vendors called out above the honking horns. But inside the museum, the Children's Hall of Memory, the air was still. The only movement was the slow, intentional unfolding of silence as people stood before a wall that no one dared speak near, as if sound might dishonor it. On that wall, stretching 20 feet across the east side of the gallery, were maps. Not digital projections, not topographic scans, but paper, tape, blood-stained corners, fabric stitched with charcoal trails, smudges where tears had dried, footprints in faded ink, a patchwork of desperation, geography, and grace. Above it all, carved into wood and gilded in bronze, the title read, "No map is useless if drawn from the heart." In front of the wall stood a boy in a pale cotton shirt, 2 inches taller than when he left Kumasi. The soles of his shoes freshly mended, and a quiet stillness about him that made even photographers forget to take their shots. Adom, his eyes scanned the maps slowly, not with pride, not with awe, but with recognition, as if each drawing were not a display, but a family member he had long known, by memory not name. Beside him sat Kasa, wrapped in a red sash, her coat brushed clean eyes, wet and tired. She no longer looked like the creature that had once clawed through garbage for scraps. She looked like what she had always been, a guardian. And today she would be honored as one. The curator stepped forward, a tall woman in a blue kente wrap. Her voice was calm but rang through the atrium like a hymn. "When this story reached us, we didn't understand it. How could we, a boy with no documents, a dog with no name, a wall in a train station covered in what others called madness? But then," she gestured to the maps. "We listened." Murmurs swept through the room. She continued, "These drawings are more than memory. They are testimony. They are cartography born not from books, but from the beating heart of a child the world tried to erase. Today, we correct that." She turned to Adom. "You showed us that belonging doesn't come from paperwork. That direction doesn't come from a compass. And that sometimes the journey home takes 12 years and a chalk line." Applause rose soft at first, then fuller. Adom lowered his head. A man in uniform stepped forward. From the Ghana Society of Civic Valor, he held a silver medallion on a satin ribbon. Kasa. The name was spoken into a microphone, but it sounded like a drum beat. Kasa blinked. Adom touched her gently, guiding her forward. She stood, tired but proud. The medallion was placed around her neck. For loyalty, the announcer said. For service. For reminding us that love does not require language. That memory sometimes walks on 4 legs. And that sometimes the map to home is guarded by paws. People wept. An old man in the corner whispered, "She's more Ghanaian than most of us." After the ceremony, people walked the exhibit. Children touched the paper with reverence. Teachers whispered to students. He drew these before he knew how to write his own name. A woman in a pressed suit asked where she could buy prints. A journalist tried to speak with Adom. He said nothing. But when they handed him a blank notebook, he drew. Just one curve, a path, and a home at the end of it. Professor Mensah stood in the corner, his arms folded behind him, eyes glassy. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. The wall spoke for them all. He watched as Adom moved slowly through the room, sometimes stopping to straighten a crooked paper, sometimes just to stare. And then, without a word, the boy stepped to the far end of the gallery, where a new wall had been left blank, pure white, unwritten. He pulled a piece of chalk from his pocket, kept there like a secret always, and began to draw. Not a map this time, but a shape, a tree. Its branches curved, and from one branch, a line fell downward. At the end of that line, 2 figures, a woman holding a child, and a dog sitting between them. He stepped back, looked, then placed the chalk on the floor and walked away. The crowd didn't speak, until one child asked softly, "Is that his last map?" And someone answered, "No, that's his first one." Professor Mensah did not stay for the applause. He remained only as long as was needed for the ceremony, the speeches, the photographs he didn't care to be in. The honor belonged elsewhere. His job had never been glory. It had always been clarity, and in Adom he had found it. 1 week after the exhibition, before the papers called and the universities reached out with offers to host him for talks and retrospectives, he slipped quietly onto a morning bus headed north. A notebook in his lap. His thoughts heavier than the satchel beside him. He did not say goodbye. He left behind a letter and a promise. This is no longer my story to stand in front of, only to tell well. He titled his book, The Living Maps. Each chapter began with a drawing, a scribbled line, a fingerprint of memory. He wrote of the boy with no voice who drew his way home, of a dog whose heart carried more geography than most maps ever could, and of a country that forgot how to listen until a child taught it to hear again. Back in the village, life had not returned to what it was. It had transformed. The community center, once a bare shell of clay and shadows, now buzzed with chalk and laughter. A sign hung proudly above the doorway in 3 languages. Mapen Kirikiere Nantawaso, the learning room of traced paths. Inside, children gathered every morning, some missing hearing, others struggling with language, some who didn't walk quite like the rest, some who had never held a pencil before, but all of them drew. No one was told their drawings were wrong. No one was told their silence was broken. They were asked simply to remember forward. The program was founded by Amma's sister, with guidance from volunteers and small grants that arrived after the exhibition. It was not charity. It was reclamation. They used Adom's maps as templates. They used Kasa's presence as calm. They used memory as curriculum. Adom never claimed leadership, but the children followed him anyway. He would sit quietly at the center of the room, a page in front of him, eyes half lowered in concentration. Around him the others would gather. Some mimicked his lines. Some drew their own. One girl drew only circles. One boy only drew homes with no doors. No one corrected them. Kasa lay beneath the low wooden table, her head resting on Adom's bare foot, her breath warm and steady. When children cried, she nudged them gently. When they fought, she sat between them until they remembered themselves. Once a child who had never spoken leaned into Kasa's side and whispered, "I think she dreams for me." Adom heard and smiled. Outside, in the shade of a neem tree, the village elders watched the classroom. It was never a school before, one murmured, just a room. "It's a home now," said another, and perhaps that was the point. Not that the world had changed, but that a part of it had been redrawn, not on paper, in people. On the day the Minister of Education visited Sunglasses Entourage photographers, Adom didn't speak. But he drew a map of the village past and future merged into one canvas. The river restored, The market rebuilt. The school expanded. He added dotted lines that led outward into unknown corners. At the edge, he wrote possible roads. The minister asked what they meant. Adom didn't reply. He handed the man a blank page and a pencil. At night, under the soft glow of lanterns, the village sometimes gathered around a small fire to listen to Amma's mother read from the living maps. She did not read every word. Sometimes she paused too long. Sometimes she held the book against her chest as if to warm it, or as if it warmed her. And Adom would sit beside her, drawing by firelight, not maps of where he had been, but of what might be. Forests, libraries, bridges made of chalk. Kasa snored softly beneath his bench. In the final scene, the camera drifts slowly into the learning room. Morning light pours through the open window, catching dust like floating memories. Children sit in clusters, drawing in silence. Adom sits at the center barefoot, his fingers moving slowly over the page. His eyes are calm, focused. Kasa lies under the table. Her breath is slow. Her head rests once again on his foot. His newest drawing shows not a village, not a road, but a heart, in the shape of a home, and inside that heart, a boy, a dog, and a map that still unfolds. Narration fades in. Quiet, firm, true. Some maps lead us to places, but the rare ones, the sacred ones, lead us back to ourselves. Not every road is made of stone. Some are made of chalk, of silence, of breath, and some are made of love. There are maps that guide our feet, and there are maps that lead the heart home to where it always belonged. Fade to black. A final line appears, in honor of every child still tracing the way home.